Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about all 64 spirit ashes or spirit summons in Elden Ring. If this is your first time watching my channel, disclaimer, I am not at all specialised in giving advice on combat or what is meta, so if you clicked on this video to find out what is the objectively best summon, I am not at all liable for the consequences. So that's why I asked you guys to help me with this video. I put out a poll and asked, what is your favourite spirit summon? And I got back over 4,500 responses. So to give this video some structure, we will be talking about each summon in order from least voted to the most voted. Before we start, I just wanted to thank today's sponsor for this video, Opera GX. It's a browser that offers tons of customization thanks to its own mods feature. And if you know me, you know that I love mods.
For the Elden Ring.
GX Mods overhauls the entire appearance, interactions and sounds of your browser. And I know what you're thinking. Yes, there is an Elden Ring mod. Not only can you get these beautiful moving backgrounds, different color shaders and background music, but it can also change your browser and keyboard noises. So it feels like you're playing Elden Ring all of the time. You can toggle all of these changes on and off to have the selection that you like the best. And it's super easy to uninstall. With just a click, you can try out as many as you want. And you might be thinking, well, I have everything the way that I like it on my current browser. Then don't worry, Opera GX has an import feature that will import all of your settings, history, bookmarks, cookies across in a matter of button clicks. And Google Chrome extensions are also compatible here. You can also keep up to date with the most recent game releases in a compact calendar on the GX Corner tab. So you can look ahead and see, for example, that Darkest Dungeon 2 is coming out soon, and so you can navigate straight to its Steam page. It's also a great way of showcasing games, as you can look through screenshots and gameplay easily. You can also sort by platform as well. Opera GX will actively look for the best offers, uncover hidden gems, and showcase free-to-play games as well. Download Opera GX for free today using my link in the description. Thank you so much, Opera GX, and now let's start the list. I will say that every single Spirit Ash got at least one vote, apart from one. Not a single person voted for the Clayman, so let's take a moment to pay our respects to the two Bubble Boys. Honestly, not the worst summon. They do make these big bubbles and then a cute bubble beam-esque move as well. But for what they do, they are expensive and slow moving. So now let's move on to what you actually voted for. First up, all tied with one vote, we have the Fire Monk, Twin Sage and Gunstone Sorcerer Ashes. The two Sorcerers are relatively the same. The Twin Sage variant uses Gunstone Torrent and Crystal Burst, which does good damage to the bosses, whereas the Gunstone Sorcerer uses Gunstone Stars and is slightly cheaper than its variant. They're okay, but there are better ranged all magic ash summons. And the Fire Monk Ash uses a variety of fire moves and melee attacks. Fire Monks have really awesome lore. They are the guardians of the Flame of Ruin, forbidden by the Erd Tree. This flame can be found in a dormant state in the mountaintop of the Giants, with the last remaining fire giant bound to guard it forever. The fire giants worship an outer god called the Fell God. The god's power manifested in the form of a cursed flame, and this fire is special because it possesses a great threat to the Golden Order. It's the only thing capable of destroying the Erd Tree. So Marika, seeing this potential threat, ordered for the fire giants to be wiped out. However, she left one alive, the last remaining fire giant. Upon realizing the flames of their forge would never die, Queen Marika marked him with a curse. O trifling giant, mayest thou tend thy flame for eternity. All this giant is able to do now is pace the snowy mountain tops, littered with the bodies of his giant brethren, and stop anyone who would try and burn the Erd Tree. The Fire Monks are also guardians who are appointed to watch over the flame. Fire beguiles those who gaze into it, and so the guardians of the flame are also its worshippers. Next up with two votes, we have the Page and the Kindred of Rot. The Page uses an S-stock for thrusting attacks and a crossbow that fires perfumer arrows for some nice fire damage. No offense to pest enthusiasts, but I can't stand these guys. Something about the way they move really unsettles me, but they are very agile, darting in and out of combat, and they do make these funny little noises. And the summon knows the incantation Pest Threads, which is an absolutely devastating move. So coming in with 4 votes, we have the Noble Sorcerer Ashes. Also, no offense to this elderly fellow, but this is not the best summon pick if you're looking for a ranged magic support. He only knows Glintstone Pebble. With that being said, he is one of the cheapest FP costs, at only 11 FP to summon him. I personally like this summon simply because people don't know that this noble was trying his best at being a sorcerer, but was not able to get into Raya Lucaria and thus is canonically bad. And it's true, this nobleman who once asked to be given a place at Raya Lucaria to learn glintstone sorceries. His talents were insufficient to be worthy of donning the stone crown, however, and he is only capable of using the most rudimentary sorcery, which explains why he is the way he is, because he's just a cute old man helping me through my adventure. Also with 4 votes we have the Miranda Sprout Ashes, a group of poison plants that scatter their toxic pollen. They're described as creeping, but honestly they rush around more than I was expecting. It's a weak summon, but I personally am interested in the Miranda flowers. Why are they named like that? There's not much lore around them, yet they are everywhere. I'm actually interested in doing a relaxing flora and fauna themed Elden Ring video, so if you like the sound of that, let me know. And closing out 4 votes, we have the Haligtree Soldier Ashes. Spirits of common soldiers who carry the sacred light. When weakened, they explode to deliver a last-ditch attack. So when they get to under half health, they will self-destruct, dealing a lot of burst damage. May the flash of our deaths guide Miquella's return. At 5 votes, we have something that I'm going to name the Soldier tier, starting with the Radahn Soldier Ashes. This ash consists of 2 soldiers, one armed with the Lord Sworn's greatsword, and the other with the Lord Sworn's straight sword in one hand and a standard torch in the other. These ashes have red eyes, also depicted in their icon. If you didn't know, any ashes that are pictured with these red eyes are programmed differently to the ones without. They're much more aggressive. They won't follow directly alongside you. They will go in immediately as they are summoned, instead of waiting for you to engage. Such is their valor that they will immediately attack after being summoned. If you're a Radahn enthusiast, you will enjoy their story as well. Radahn soldiers were all reputed to be masterful warriors, and it was popularly said that Redmanes knew no weakness. And the description is no word of a lie. They're a very good summon, excellent damage, and perfect if you're looking for an aggressive melee support. The location you find them, along with the implications of their summons and their ability to utilize fire, it's like they're trying to fight the rot, and they maintain a spirits to do so. You can find these ashes all the way at the back of Radahn's boss arena, in the War Dead catacombs, and it's a really unique one at that. Inside you'll find spectral enemies, Radahn Soldiers, Redmane and Clean Rot Knights. They are all fighting endlessly, in death, against each other. Some rooms are also filled with pools of rot, including the one where you find the ashes, implying that this is where they met their end. All in all, the Radahn Soldiers are an underrated pick on today's list, but a popular choice against Malenia, as her rot typing makes her weak to their fire attacks, and just thematic if you want justice for Radahn. Next we have the Raya Lucaria Soldier Ashes, 2 foot soldiers and 1 knight captain. The soldiers of Raya Lucaria were also known as the Cuckoos. They were given free rein by the Academy to wage war as they pleased, and they were infamous of their rapacious ways. Rapacious meaning predatory, voracious, excessively grasping. They are lawless bandits, but highly skilled fighters, and the Lucarians hired them to protect the Academy, and in exchange they taught them some basic spells and let them run amok, taught to the Knights of the Cuckoo by the Academy as payment for their contract. And one day, the Academy had enough of the Lucarians' reigns and started a rebellion, and the Cuckoos were more than happy to take part in overthrowing the royals. The cuckoo itself is an emblem. The bird's shrewd gaze is an expression of their refusal to be mere servants of the Academy. So this was inevitable. The Cuckoos felt constrained, so it didn't take much for them to want to rebel. And the actual bird, a cuckoo, has similar behaviour, Cuckoos are incredibly bloodthirsty, selfish, rampaging birds. They infamously lay eggs in the nests of others and will even kick out hosts' eggs, causing them to smash, just so they have room for their own. Everything about the cuckoos implies them to be ruthless bastards who waged war for loot and the hell of it. All of us tarnished are likewise bastards who pillage every chest and cadaver we happen upon. We're basically kindred spirits. Perhaps more importantly, the gentleman with the greatsword will throw cuckoo glintstones, and his two subordinates will throw albinuric pots. Cheeky. In combat, their AI can be a little strange at times. The captain will often stay back and let his two soldiers do most of the work, but he will occasionally throw makeshift sorceries, the cuckoo glintstones. It's just a lump of magical rock that is meant to somehow mimic casting glintstone pebble, for example. I mean, I can see why the cuckoos wanted to rebel if the Carians were patronising them like this. And the last soldiers are the ones from Leyndell, equipped with a spear and great shield. You get an idea of them forming the first line of defence while protecting Leyndell. During the Shattering, they were the ramparts that fortified the royal capital. Essentially, two meat shields. This summon is pretty tanky due to their shields, but honestly they're just not as good as other defensive or shield type summons that we'll talk about later on this list. And the last Ash with 5 votes is the Putrid Corpse. From what I've seen, the only positive about these Ashes is that they have a very large health pool, so they're only good for being meat shields. Apart from that, they just hold their head and moan. Though their movements are dull and confused, their low moans make them effective at drawing the attention of enemies. There are actually quite a lot of variants of the Putrid Corpse enemy type, but the Spirit Ash is just the standard version, which is a shame. I personally think the Blistered subtype could have made their combat style more interesting and more fitting to their putrid name. The blistered ones explode into clouds of blood flies. They also spawn miles away from you, which is very aggravating if you're in an open area. A couple of these Ashes have this style of appearing, so they're not very reliable if you're trying to plan and place them strategically. 6 votes we have little goofy nasty boys, closest thing to goblins you can summon in the game. You get 3 members of the Vulgar Militia, who wield long-hafted serrated hatchets. These brutal weapons are particularly effective at causing blood loss to opponents. With their jumping attacks and bleed procs, these little guys are pretty savage. In fact, their saw is said to have been used to cut up bodies to feed the militia, but there are no first-hand witnesses to confirm the dire rumour. However, in contrast to their unsettling tale, their backstories are honestly quite sad. In the lands between, the small were scorned, and so they formed their Vulgar Militia as a means to make a living, albeit in ignominy. Ignominy is a graphic way of saying that one is in a state of deep personal humiliation and disgrace. So these little fellows created the Vulgar Militia as a way to band together and survive. And their savagery seems to come from the hatred of being discriminated against for just being small. Their headpieces were even created with an upward extension to create an appearance of larger size, however slightly. Don't let anyone put you down for something as arbitrary as your height. And for that, sometimes you just need to goblinate your enemies. Also with 6 votes is the Nomad Ashes. He isn't armed with any conventional weapon, just the eyes of a madman. This is probably one of the best AoE summons that I tested, the only summon to have the Madness subtype as well. He is able to emit the terrible flame of frenzy from his eyes, but has low HP and is frail, unable to take much in the way of punishment. He is pretty squishy, but the Flame of Frenzy incantation does excellent damage in close proximity to anything around him. However, there are only a handful of enemies and bosses who can actually be affected by madness. The Frenzy incantations explicitly say they're only effective against Tarnished, so you can damage them, but they won't necessarily get a madness proc. This Nomad was a member of a tribe that was entombed in the earth, so as to bury the maddening disease that followed them. As the Lord of the Frenzied Flame, I feel that it is only right that the merchants get their vengeance against those who wrong them. And the nomads referred to in the Ash title are connected to the nomadic merchants, the vendors you find around the lands between. This summon has a stick with a hand on the end. He taps around with it, which may imply that he has completely lost his sight, only able to use his eyes to release the flame of frenzy. May chaos take the world. 7 people voted for the Land Squirt Ashes. If we're going to analyse these seriously, the best thing about them is their poison cloud, and you can actually counterpick them against any enemy that happens to use a poison move, because when the poison builds up on the summon, it will actually cause them to overload, spouting large poison clouds everywhere. But this is such a specific situation. The 3 squirts move agonisingly slowly, and they have predetermined spawn points, so you may have to look around to find them, which isn't really ideal if you are in need of backup quickly. To end on a positive, they are insanely tanky, so using them as a line of defence is possible. Next with 7 votes we have the Winged Misbegotten Ashes, a spirit with the aspect of wings which takes flight to loose arrows from its bow. Although armed with a bow, the summon still has to get in pretty close range to do any damage, and that's because it's a short bow. It's designed to inflict additional damage by sacrificing range. They fire anywhere between 1 and 3 arrows in a barrage. They also have a knife, but I barely ever saw it get used in favour of dodging instead. They did have a flying tackle, which was pretty cool. The whole design is pretty humble, most likely on account of them being hated and enslaved. They wouldn't necessarily have access to a whole armoury, but them being one of the rare flying type summons is definitely unique. Next are the spirits of Marionette Soldiers, with avian features that were created to serve a sorcerer, the Avionette Soldier Ashes, and I honestly can't give them a better review than this comment right here. I used them for the first time in my first playthrough and fell in love with the little guys. Their flying movement makes them surprisingly hard to hit, so they are survivable despite not having too much HP. They have a ranged firebomb attack that always pulls aggro when I need them to. The whirling dervish spinny melee attack thing they do almost always causes a bleed proc on its own and staggers bosses frequently. The fact that it's 2 of them helps split up fights against multiple enemies very well, and finally, I think they're very cute. And I couldn't agree more. Something about their little bodies, long spears and reckless flailing makes them quite charming and unpredictable. And it's certainly interesting that these are the bird version of the Marionette Soldiers. At 8 votes we have the Godrick Soldier Ashes, a really good pick for early game as they're pretty tanky and work well together. One has devastating charged hammer attacks in the vanguard, and a crossbowman brings up the rear, but it can also switch to a sword and shield in melee range. They are all that remains of the army that fled the royal capital of the Erdtree under Godrick. 9 votes we have the Skeletal Bandit's Ashes. He Get Back Up. He serves as a good distraction, and he also has the power to resurrect himself. While he is doing the resurrecting, you will have to make sure that he doesn't get hit at all during the process, otherwise he is gone for good. That is why I would recommend the Skeletal Militiamen, who are similar to him, but there are 2 of them. We'll talk more about them later. 9 votes, we sadly have Nepheli's Puppet. Now, to obtain Nepheli in Spirit Summon form, you will have to disregard any remaining moral compass that you may have had. To do so, you need to trick her into drinking a potion. This potion will turn her into a lifeless puppet, and then you can buy her as a summon from Salavis's shop. And if you thought that would be the end of it, her puppet's description will not let you forget the heinous act that you had to commit. Puppet of a warrior who was betrayed by her pure heart. A diamond in the rough, deserving of special care, lest its potential be squandered. As a summon, Nepheli is excellent. She wields Stormhawk axes, which have a really awesome skill called Thunderstorm, which does lightning damage. Her attacks are really powerful, and she has a lot of poise. I've rarely seen her get knocked down, in fact. But the reason why she is not voted highly on this list, despite her being very powerful, is because it's a shame that we have to acquire her in the way that we do. I love Nepheli. It's a shame that this is the only way she can help me fight every boss. Next is a squad of 3 archers firing cold ghost flame arrows. These help build up frostbite. Apart from that, the firing speed is pretty slow, they are squishy and get knocked over very easily. But if you like your summons to be more passive and give you support from behind, then these are perfect if you like more of a challenge. I like living the literary trope of skirmishing with sword and ball in front, archers behind. At 10 votes, we have the Magikarp of Spirit Summons, the Wandering Noble. The Wandering Nobles, bless them, have little HP and attack very slowly and reluctantly. They also do this little O whenever they see an enemy. So, obligatory Gemma reference.
Boys! A chandelier dropped on him!
Great distraction to get enemies to change targets and take the pressure off you, but they shouldn't be counted on to help you take out enemies. The description is even more unrelenting. These undead beings are the pitiful product of unending life. Surely they were in search of something once, but whatever it was has been long forgotten. Interestingly, there is a group of wandering nobles at the dragon-burnt ruins who can be heard chanting. They are praying to the dragon, Agil, who patrols the lake.
Agil, oh Agil, burn truth. Agil.
Why? The dead gazed at the skies over the lakes of Limgrave, praying that the dragon's flame would burn them to ash. Unable to remember their purpose, all the nobles can do is beg for something to end their existence, and as you get closer, this will trigger Agil to fly over and make their wish come true, which might offer an explanation as to why when you summon the wandering nobles in range of a dragon, they will actually refuse to help you fight it, simply cowering in fear. This is applicable for all dragons, not just Agil. Perhaps this is them choosing to succumb pitifully. Putting together a band and one of the good brass section, 10 out of 10 hire these musicians. These are the Oracle Envoys, some of the most abstract looking individuals in the lands between, but also some of the most beloved. It is said that when Oracle Envoys appear playing their pipes, they do so to herald the arrival of a new god or a new age. The theming is so good that when you summon them, it's like they're performing a fanfare in recognition of you. The way in which they attack is by blowing bubbles through their envoy horns. They also can twirl around and perform a melee attack, kind of like a spinning top. Aside from their funny appearance, their existence is rather mysterious and a little sinister. No one knows what the cloth hides, but some claim to have heard a faint whimpering from inside. It must have been their imagination. The round top and bottom end is quite strange to look at. What lies under it raises many questions. What we can see is pale, bluish-toned skin, long arms, no functional legs, and they bleed silver. With all these factors, it's theorised that envoys could be albinurics, specifically first-generation ones. The long gangly arms that envoys have match the proportions of the male first-generation albinurics like Pidia and Albus, and you find envoys not only in Leyndell, but also in Miquella's Haligtree, which is a safe haven for albinurics. So maybe the envoys are a subtype of albinuric, but they are definitely more than their marshmallowy bubble boy appearance belies. At 12 votes we have the Kaiden Sellsword Ashes. The Kaiden Sellsword is a melee summon carrying a massive blade made for dismounting other riders. He also performs a damage increase warcry to enhance his already considerable strength, and that shout can disrupt the balance of smaller enemies around him. His weapon, the Dismounter, doesn't actually dismount enemies, but it does deal a lot of damage. And as these sellswords were horse-riding folk, they designed something that would be effective to give them the advantage against any other mounted foes. I love Kindred Soldiers. They are a really interesting mix of Northern German, Scandinavian and Mongol design influences, and I love my Kaiden boy a lot. I did a bit of research into the influences of what the Kaiden armour is based off of. The headpiece looks like this style of helmet from the Viking Age, and the body armour seems to be a hybrid of European and Asian influences. The fabric parts are reminiscent of a gambeson, a padded defensive jacket, and the armoured scales make up a design that seems to bear resemblance to the lamella armour commonly used in ancient and medieval China, Korea and Mongolia. The fur, however, is purely for character design to illustrate that they hail from the mountaintops of the wintry north, In real life, I'm not so sure fur served any benefit. Pelts would be heavy and not offer the same protection as mail or plate, but this is a video game after all, and the armour just looks great. Also at 12 votes we have Battlemage Hugues Ashes. I love this big guy. Hugues uses two significant moves, the Gavel and the Cannon of Heimer. You may not have heard of these Glintstone sorceries, and that's because they are only used by the battle mages who follow the Heimer Conspectus. Both moves are spectacular. The Gavel is a giant magical hammer that slams down, pummeling anything in its way deep into the floor. And the cannon is equally as devastating, a magical projectile that detonates over a wide area, dealing excellent AoE damage. But both of the descriptions for these spells tell us that this sorcery employs might as a means to quell conflict. So instead of being used to instigate, Heimer scholars seek to quell conflict with cannon fire and the gavel. This is because Heimer was an adjudicator of the academy, so they would be the one to judge and settle disputes between teachers, students and officials. I don't think the sorceries were necessarily used offensively every time. I think they were originally created as a symbol. The gavel is a ceremonial tool used by a judge to call for order in the courtroom, and it is also used to indicate the final ruling. The symbol of a cannon was less apparent at first, but after some research I found something called the gun salute or cannon salute. This began as a maritime tradition where warships would fire cannonballs harmlessly out into the sea. This was to signify that the ammunition was spent and they bore no hostile intent. So could the Heimer cannon fire signify that they were coming in peace as an unbiased mediator to resolve any problems? And it's possible you may be thinking, well, I haven't heard of the Heimer Conspectus until now, and that may be because there's barely any sight or reference to them in the academy. Heimer isn't depicted in any of the portraits. The only reason we know of the Conspectus is because the battle mages wear the Heimer glintstone crown, stone heads that symbolise their respective teachers. Heimer's is quite unusual because the face is covered with a blindfold. This is how justice as a concept is widely depicted, a figure without passion or prejudice to ensure a fair trial. The reason why the Heimer mages are also not seen in the academy is because whenever war broke out and the academy sealed its gates, only Heimer scholars dared venture outside. Those who followed Heimer weren't like others at the academy. They put theory into practice. Seclusion is no way to foster discovery. It is only a convenient form of escape. So that is why they are called battle mages. They aren't interested in just studying. They want to act, to fight. This is also shown by the arm and leg wraps, tattered from being worn on the battlefield. Comparing them to the equivalent armour pieces for the sorcerers who stayed at the academy, you can see how tattered and soiled they've become. So originally, the Heimer Conspectus was created to quell, but Hugues developed a longing for it. A bloodthirsty sorcerer attacking anything indiscriminately. Also at 13 votes we have Perfumer Tricia. Tricia the Perfumer is a peaceful healer who dedicated her efforts to treating Misbegotten, Omen and all those seen as impure. This was a morally good cause, but sadly frowned upon in the lands between. Under the Golden Order, Omens and Misbegotten are beings who are considered lesser, but Tricia took pity on them and used her apothecary skills to help them. Where her efforts failed, she was their companion as they died, watching over them to ensure that they could pass peacefully, free of pain. As a summon, she acts as a support type, applying uplifting aromatic, which boosts your attack, and also coating you in a shield bubble, which will completely negate one enemy attack. The buff she gives you is great and she does fire damage. She throws explosive powder called Spark Aromatic in an arc that does fire damage as well. At 17 votes we have the Crystallian Ashes, spirits that wield round crystalline blades, both big and small. Its sturdy body is hewn from crystal long ago. It's hard enough to blunt its opponent's blades, but blows from bludgeoning weapons can shatter it easily. The Crystallian boasts some of the highest poise values of all of the Spirit Ashes. The Crystallian is a good summon for casters as they draw aggro and have insane defensive abilities. I play as a mage and this seemed the most appropriate and effective summon as it doesn't stagger super often. The weakness to blunt weapons adds a nice debuff which I think is fair for its mid damage. If your enemy uses blunt type weapons, it will do virtually no damage to the summon. It's like trying to break a diamond with a twig. But if the enemy uses bludgeoning attacks, then it will crumble. And another one of the few flying summons, we have the Warhawk Ashes. A lot of you who voted for this bird agreed that having a bird companion was just really nice. And I agree, it reminded me of playing Hunter in World of Warcraft. Personally, it's like having a bird of prey as a companion, and that is always just so cool. But sadly, these birds were manufactured as war devices, their talons of which have been sliced off so that razor-fine swords could be grafted in their place. Under Godrick's rule of Stormveil Castle, he couldn't see the natural beauty that the Stormhawks possessed, so he disfigured them for his grotesque hobby. The hawk perished as it solemnly gazed at its former home. The storm is a warhawk's cradle. I feel bad for the deeds done to it before it came into my possession. Grafting is a horribleness that shouldn't be of this world. He was not only my summon to help me in a pinch, but a wounded soul that became my friend. Armed with shields, hammers, great and straight swords, we have 5 headless soldiers who confound foes by disappearing and reappearing at will. The reason why the Mausoleum Soldiers are missing their heads is because they followed their masters into death by severing their own heads from their bodies. You find these headless men guarding the walking mausoleums. Their armour depicts the mausoleum bell, which rings in constant mourning for the soulless demigods. Now, what demigod is inside the walking mausoleum, or mausoleums as there are multiple ones? A ghost from the beyond tells us the mausoleum prowls, cradling the soulless demigod. O America, Queen Eternal, he is your unwanted child. We know that Godwyn had his soul destroyed on the night of his assassination. Now all that remains is a husk of his body. But was he really unwanted by America? Questions for another time, I think. What is for sure is that having a group of soldiers as loyal as the ones of the mausoleum is nothing short of awe-inspiring. To charge the enemy into the fray together with a band of sworn brothers, as if such countless battles throughout our journey was our redemption, our baptism through flames, is truly an honour. Here we have another perfumer. This one is nothing like that of Tricia. This is Clayman, a depraved perfumer. Depraved perfumers practice their art for themselves alone, a far cry from Tricia's selfless aid. And this is shown in his moveset. Instead of buffing you like Tricia does, he drinks his potions for his own gain. He also uses the same spark aromatic, but also the poison spray mist, and actually has a melee attack where Tricia doesn't. Our perfumers are super cool, exploding dust, healing, bubble shield, etc. But I mainly like Clayman for the tidbit about secret physic of revivification and the mystery that brings. Clayman was a notably formidable perfumer whose strength rivaled that of heroes, and it is said that he was in search of a secret physic of revivification. Whether he was seeking this potion to revive his allies or perhaps to resurrect thralls for himself, we will never know. But depraved perfumers always act with their own interests as a priority. 18 votes, we have the Black Flame Monk Amon Ashes. The Black Flame monks were originally fire monks, which we discussed at the beginning of this list, but the Black Flame ones are traitors, abandoning their post as guardians. They were tempted by an arguably more powerful fire, the Black Flame, which could once slay gods. So these monks defected to join the Godskin Apostles and their worship of the Glowmide Queen. The Apostles were all embraced by the Glowmide Queen, and the Black Flame was their armour within. The ash we have possession of is a monk called Amon, and he became the first fire monk to turn traitor. Or perhaps It is better said that he fled from the giant's flame out of cowardice. What exactly Amon was afraid of is unclear, but the practice of the fire monks is quite masochistic. A lot of their incantations will leave you burnt and damaged after using them, which is as intended, as a reminder that they must fear the flame. This self-flagellating behaviour may have driven Amon away, and as a summon, Amon utilises Black Flame to gradually sap the HP of enemies without needing to hurt himself in the process. At 18 votes we have the Azula Beastman Ashes. Beastmen from Farum Azula are chosen to guard the ancient dragon Placidusax. Beastmen from doomed Farum Azula, the slowly crumbling ruins in the skies. These ruins are said to be the remains of a giant mausoleum enshrining an ancient dragon, guarded by chosen beastmen who wield weapons clad in lightning. Interestingly, you can find one beastman not in Farum Azula, and that one is one of the very first bosses in the Groveside Cave in Limgrave. But how did this creature get here? Well, that's because the architecture of Farum Azula is breaking apart, why it is also called Crumbling Farum Azula and Doomed Farum Azula. And we find evidence of this all over the Lands Between, fragments from the stone structure. Stone fragment found near places where the ruins have fallen from the sky. These shards of stone are believed to have once been part of a temple in the sky. Next we have the handsome and silent hunter Dolores. Another puppet, Dolores is a very unique summon. She's not a damage dealer by far, but she is a very interesting technique specialist. She fires Centrina's arrows from her short bow. Centrina's arrows cause sleep build-up incredibly quickly, much faster than regular sleep bone arrows. Having an enemy fall asleep multiple times allows you to capitalize on critical attacks. Centrina's arrows are also very limited in the Lands Between, so having a summon that has access to an endless supply is really nice. Her name also has a bitter irony, as her puppet body can be found in Celephas's secret basement, slumped and still, as if she was sleeping herself. Have you ever wondered why the pumpkin heads go bonk bonk? A nice callback to one of my first videos talking about the mad pumpkin heads. These are former gladiators who were driven to insanity by something, so as a makeshift cure, their heads were encased in these incredibly heavy pumpkin-shaped helmets. Now, although the helmet's description states that it was to keep the crazed warriors from panicking and alleviate feelings of pressure and claustrophobia, I can't help but disagree. I don't think the helmet helps at all. Their idle animations often show them banging at their helmets, then stopping to look upwards at a sky they can no longer see. Being shut in darkness would make anyone gradually more paranoid and lash out more easily. Specifically, he rampages as if driven mad when agitated by bloodshed or the humming of insects, perhaps experiencing endless war and encountering some type of bug monster traumatized this poor soldier, so any reminder lapses him into a manic state. Interestingly, this reflects in his summon. If any bloodshed happens, he will be driven into a frenzy, slamming his head repeatedly against the ground, doing massive damage to anything in that area. Also, if you happen to be standing nearby, you will get knocked over as well. It doesn't deal any damage, but it serves as a warning that the pumpkin heads are volatile. The Vulgar has caused me many more problems than solutions. Love him to death. I personally love these guys and feel for them a lot. Fanged Imp Ashes at 22 votes. You can actually choose these ashes as your starting keepsake, and they're pretty decent in the early game. These spirits are well suited to causing a disturbance, moving nimbly like pests and hurling magic pots. They are pretty speedy, backing up quickly to throw their ranged attack for magic damage. Chose as a starting gift, these two little guys help me with the majority of early battles and even the Elden Beast. The chance to throw magic pots can do massive damage and stagger to some enemies. Add in their jittery movements and frantic attack patterns, and these two make for some lovable cretins. Not only will you love these two little gremlins, but the two imps seem fond of each other's company as well. One word: rats. These rats cost nothing. They are 0 FP to cast, and because of that, they are objectively the best. And the more you upgrade this ash, the more rats you get, maxing out at 5 massive rats. The rats don't actually incur any rune cost when you want to upgrade them, you just need the materials and they're free. Albinauric, my beloved. Whoever wrote the description for these ashes put so much character and summed them up perfectly. A strapping duo of cartwheeling spirits with dumpy heads that resemble those of frogs. And this is pretty much how they fight, cartwheeling and rolling around the enemies, occasionally stopping to melee or use their freezing breath. In addition, we know that these particular Albinaurics are young ones because of their choice of weapons, unique weapon wielded by young Albinaurics. And interestingly enough, this ash description is the only in-game reference that explicitly mentions that there are 2 generations of Albinaurics. These froggy face guys are the 2nd generation Albinaurics. So what is a 1st generation Albinauric? Well, we'll touch on an example of one of those later in this list, but the word generation is a little bit misleading. Rather, they are more like versions, v.1.0 and v.2.0. Because Albinaurics are life forms made by human hands, and when the first batch failed, a second batch was created to improve upon the imperfections. So what we're looking at here is supposedly closer to their maker's ideal of perfection. I hated fighting this enemy, so it is really enjoyable to have them on my side. Next is another example of an enemy that you hated fighting, but having them on your side is sweet revenge. The Marionette Soldiers, crafted to serve the Sorcerers of Lucaria. These dolls are equipped with bows and fire arrows pretty endlessly in the direction of an enemy. I noticed that they sometimes don't necessarily need to have line of sight and will fire arrows into the wall that is in front of an enemy, but their attacks are fast and unrelenting, which is perfect for a long-range support summon. The Marionette Archers turn all foes into pincushions, bristling with arrows. They're decently tough for ranged units, they do decent damage and grab opponents' focus, and watching them flop around spraying arrows is hilarious. They can also sort of overload, spinning like crazy, probably due to the fact that they are on the verge of falling apart, they are ill-disciplined, and attack without warning. A maiden without a tarnished without a maiden, and yet no guide to bring them together. We have Theralina, a lonely maiden that you run into at the Radahn festival. She doesn't speak, which is most likely due to her being a puppet, and her spirit ashes are classed as the puppet type. You can tell by the colour difference on the summon icons. Puppets are blue. You're able to purchase these ashes from Celavis's shop, and she is a backline support summon. She uses healing incantations and holy water pots, but she is not a fighter by nature and is ill-suited to battle. Having the heal buffs were awesome. Trying to keep her alive was so much fun. Felt like a maiden and you were a team. One does damage while the other heals and tries to pull aggro. To make use of her heal effectively, you'll need to stand next to her in range of the greater heal radius. In addition, those holy water pots inflict holy damage, which is really effective against undeads, deathbirds and revenants. Where some bosses attempt to crush my spirit, Jarwight is my guiding jarlight in the darkness. Jarwight is another puppet-style summon, wearing nothing but a jar, very sexy. His attack style is throwing various pots like lightning, fire, poison and so on. Why does he wear a jar on his head? Well, Jarwight wished to become the innards of a living jar. The living jars contain dregs inherited from those who came before. Thus our warriors passed from jar to jar, carrying dreams of greatness. And as the great Alexander puts it,
It is my ordeal, you could say. To test myself, to better myself, to fell ever greater foes. And then, one day, we'll be a single great champion, the greatest of them all.
So Jarwight, inspired by this, longed to become part of those innards that would contribute to the whole champion-like being. But he was turned away. The warrior Jar once told the nameless man this: "You are not ready to join the warriors inside. No, you must apply yourself, better yourself, and one day I will return for you." But sadly, we find Jarwight as a lifeless puppet, which means his dream was robbed from him. Celavis drugged and kidnapped him before he was able to reach his true potential. His body will never be able to be consumed and stored inside the Great Warrior Jar, but as a summon, we can give him that last taste of battle and his deserved warrior freedom. Next is a summon that you can pick up pretty early on through the chest that teleports you to the Celia Crystal Tunnel. You can pick up the Rotten Stray, a summon who will help apply Scarlet Rot. Though it is only a small creature, it is as violent as it is nimble, and its fangs fester with poisonous rot. At 35 FP cost, it's not bad at all for an agile, quick attacking and rot summon. The trade-off is that the doggo is a little squishy. I had a dog named Bosco. I called him Bok for short. He had a really bad skin condition his whole life, probably why he was left astray in the town I rescued him from. Bok got me through a bad divorce and several bad spells of depression. He passed shortly before Elden Ring released. He used to chill by me on the couch when I'd play Bloodborne and Dark Souls. I made the summon because it reminded me of him, and it felt like, I don't know, getting to hang more or something. I'd always cheer the summon, yelling, "Get him, Bok." Thank you whoever wrote this reply. A lot of people really love this summon, and it's really heartwarming to hear why. 42 votes, we have Redmane Knight Ogre. This summon is honestly a lot lower than I expected. Ogre is actually a legendary rarity ash, and is quite an underrated choice here. You get this ash from the very back of Radahn's area in the catacombs, same place that you got the ashes for Radahn Soldiers. Ogre is versatile. He has a great bow and a powerful melee attack. He's tough and he has a lot of personality. Ogre is a red-eyed summon, so mostly does his own thing. He charges up powerful gravity magic arrows like the ones you see Radahn do at the beginning of his boss fight, and this is because Ogre studied techniques to manipulate gravity alongside Radahn, so they most likely learn this art at the same time together. Using the Warcry skill or any of the other skills that have the word roar or shriek in them will activate Ogre's special ability, a rain of gravity arrows. This attack can only be activated once per summon. Next is a group of 5 Demi-Humans, a chaotic and effective crowd control team. If you happen to summon these at night, they will be far more aggressive and deal more damage, which ties into their lore really well. When night falls, their blood boils and they become feral. Demi-Humans, despite being part human, like their name, are not considered intelligent beings. The Demi-Human Queen Staff was gifted to the Demi-Humans to foster peace. It can be wielded even by those of low intelligence. So the Academy gave a peace offering to the Demi-Humans, which we can see they honoured, as you can find Sorcerer Azure hanging out with the Demi-Humans in the Hermit Village. It's sad to think that the staff may have been given to patronise the Demi-Humans, as the staff was sneered at by fools in the Academy, presumably because this staff only needs 10 intelligence to use. However, the reason why they are fools is because the Demi-Human Queen Staff is actually really strong for Strength Int hybrid users. It's great for utility spells if you want to do a hybrid build without dumping points into Int. So who's laughing now? Sadly, the Demi-Humans that we're able to summon don't use magic, but they are intelligent, and funnily enough, the description changes ever so slightly when you upgrade the ashes. At +0 it reads, they seem somewhat intelligent, but at a +1 and higher it changes to, they seem intelligent, removing the somewhat. So I like to think that in our care we're helping them realise their potential. The cute, courageous and life-affirming screams of the Demis as they charge alongside you into battle are enough to make you face any enemy bravely. Man-Serpent Ashes. The Man-Serpent Ashes are honestly one of the cutest looking models, big smiley snake face. Specifically, this Man-Serpent is described as being deformed, but honestly he doesn't appear to be any different than the other Man-Serpents you found around Mount Gelmir. However, perhaps all Man-Serpents are considered deformed. What we do know is that the Elder Serpent that dwelled on Mount Gelmir devoured a demigod, and the birth of the Man-Serpents followed. But who is the mother of the Man-Serpents? Well, during Raya's questline at Volcano Manor, you receive an item that may give us the answer. A woman named Dedekar indulged in every form of adultery and wicked pleasure imaginable, giving birth to a myriad of grotesque children. So it's possible that Dedekar, a human, mated with the Elder Snake, which resulted in half-human, half-snake creatures. Whether they're considered deformed or not, they certainly are adored by everyone who voted for them. I just love him, his chaotic swinging about, his lanky body, just pure magic to be honest. Using a magma whip candlestick, this fella does nice damage in a large area and makes a great companion. I can't help but laugh every time I summon them. It's just so funny seeing this little dude go ham on a boss. Known as the first Omen Killer, we have Rollo next. He's just a straight up menacing bloke. Him producing a physic to rid himself of emotion sounds brutal. His backstory is sick. Rollo used to be a perfumer, which gave him the skills to create a potion that would numb his feelings, thus enabling him to enact his nightmarish labour, hunting the Omen. Omens are unfairly hated and hunted simply for being born cursed. The most noticeable feature of an Omen is their twisted horns, and Omen killers take pleasure in cutting off these horns and decorating their weapons with them, like a sick prize. And these horns hurt. Rollo's cleaver can cause blood loss because of them. Most practical melee spirit Ash that can ground enemies with his jump attack, which he can spam repeatedly. His attacks also do massive poise damage and cause bleed. He also has fire attacks and a large health pool. Rollo does fire attacks because of his background as a perfumer. He has knowledge of making incendiary concoctions. Others were inspired by Rollo's deeds and became Omen Killers as well. They mimicked his style of dress, which is why the Omen Killer set is very similar to the Perfumer's set. So what happened to Rollo? His ashes are dropped from the Fell Twins boss, who are two Omens. This implies that Rollo met his fate at the hands of those he hunted. Coming in next we have another legendary spirit Ash called Kristoff, an ancient Dragon Knight. He's up there with one of the best tanking style summons. Equipped with a great shield, partisan and thunderbolts, Kristoff has really good reach and a solid defense. The presence of Kristoff comes across as imposing, more so than the Banished Knights in my opinion, and conveys a quality of battle prowess. Additionally, I adore the ancient Dragon Knights as a whole. Everything from their lore down to the design of their armour, they are among the most fascinating of foes present in the lands between. Kristoff's demeanour originates from the fact that he earned the hero's honour of Erdtree Burial for the feat of capturing Godfrey the Grafted. Not to be confused with Godrick. We don't know much about Godfrey. In fact, this is the only description that even mentions him by name. As a result, this is one of the most negatively viewed bosses because it is an exact copy of Godrick's model. So it's widely viewed as a lazy design for padding purposes. But to do a bit of theory crafting here, we can assume Godfrey was the one responsible for the first siege of Leyndell, hence why it was such a commendable act for Kristoff to capture him. He's my champion, plus he's a standout elite from the ranks of the Leyndell Militia. His deeds are worth celebrating and his Erdtree Burial was very much deserved. I'll talk more about Erdtree Burial later in this video. Now, we've all been subjected to the heat-seeking, one-shotting arrows from the ancestral followers in the Silfra River, but now you have the opportunity to have one of your own with the ancestral follower Ashes. The exceptional range of his abilities are great. When he eliminates an enemy, he heals a bit. His melee attacks hit through a number of attacks. He's my personal favourite. Simply summon him at range so he's at a safe distance and watch him decimate enemies from afar. I felt comforted when I am 1v1ing a boss and I see an occasional bright blue arrow snipe my opponent in the head. It's also nice to have a friend during a fight that won't attract the boss's aggro off of me and cause unpredictable attacks in melee. The ancestral followers are versed in distinctive spiritual arts, so it's ironic that we now have a spirit of one of these spiritual followers to command for ourselves. Next we have Bloodhound Knight Flo. Bloodhounds are known for their fierce loyalty and vowing service to one master for their lifetime. Flo would only ever serve a true king, and so the rabid stray never found a master. But in a way, we became that master, as we have the ability to summon him on command. However, he does still march to the beat of his own drum, as he is a red-eyed summon, so once he's up he will do as he wishes and not follow you directly. He's a stray after all. He complements a hyper-aggressive playstyle, dealing bleed damage with the Bloodhound's Fanged Sword. Coupled with the fact that his stance is reminiscent of Artorias, what's not to like? Banished Knight Engvall was actually an Ashe that wasn't commonly available on release. It was added specifically in patch 1.03. Engvall is one of the two significant and named Banished Knights, the other being Oleg, one of the two knights dubbed the Wings of the Storm. Banished Knights were sent to the Fringes, where they were forced to start anew with only despair for company, so they were literally banished from civilization to guard the outskirts and borders, and Engvall in particular watched over a masterless castle for many years and gained renown as the hero of the Fringes. It is my belief that this masterless castle is Castle Sol, a run-down place filled with the spirits of banished knights. But it was Engvall's choice to stay here. He was actually given a much more attractive offer. Despite his banishment, he rejected the invitation of the Grace-Given Lord. The character with this exact title is Morgott, the Grace-Given. So Engvall was possibly invited back to Leyndell or Stormveil to serve a lord very closely, but he declined because Engvall didn't seek glory. You find Engvall's ashes in the Murkwater Catacombs, a standard resting place for the deceased. We'll return to this later when we talk about Oleg, but you should know that Engvall was very humble, even in death. So in terms of kit, Engvall wields a large halberd, twirling, stabbing, and even harnessing the storm to do a jump attack to ground any enemies. He's also considered to be a little bit more tanky than his brethren Oleg. Engvall is my bro. I love the Banished Knight's halberd and Banished Knight's drip and use it myself. When I summon him, it's like calling your older brother to school to fight. I'm basically a mini him. Next is the Skeletal Militiaman, two skelly boys with pokey spears. I like them because as long as you can keep aggro off their corpses after they die, they will infinitely respawn. As the Skeletal Militiamen are classified as those who live in death, they will continue to rise again and again until properly finished off. They're able to revive themselves, never truly dying. What's important to note about the revive is that it's not instant. The way skeletons revive after getting downed is super useful if they manage to get back up, and protecting their spirits while resurrecting actually takes thinking and effort, so it's still rewarding. A Night Maiden and a Nox Sorceress by your side. They are the only puppets in the game that became puppets of their own volition, and their sisters. Very interesting look into Nox culture. One uses the Nox Flying Sword for massive reach, and the other dual wields daggers, and can cast Night Maiden's Mist to leave a moving cloud of damage. They take turns dashing in and out of combat, moving like water. They were so aesthetically pleasing when you meet them. It was such a delight to watch them fight by your side. In an unexpected turn, you actually find these ashes in a chest in Nokron, and they are indeed classed as puppet ashes. Before this, the only puppets we were aware of were those crafted by Celivus, but these sisters became puppets of their own volition, and have no connection to Celivus. However, they are described as being an old puppet, so perhaps this practice goes back a lot further than we once anticipated. How mysterious. I love the Nokron story, but in the lore, these two wingly became spirit summons, and I don't feel sad about summoning them and disturbing their rest. It's like they've taken their duty beyond death, and I can help them serve. 3 of the fiercest soldiers to grace the lands between. They do nothing and explode. These 3 jar warriors, or soul jars of fortune, are very, very adorable, but they really aren't used for their combat. They waddle around, attack slowly, and if they ever get anywhere near fire, they will combust, causing damage to you and your enemies. My soul jars gave their lives for me willingly, and I couldn't ask more of them. They will also explode if their HP reaches 0. These little jars make up for their lack of combat experience in their bravery. Nothing more valiant than soul jars sacrificing themselves to defend their comrades. Tell them how brightly a fire jar burns. Another rare flying type ashes is Stormhawk Dean, a super mobile, aggressive bird, and they can buff you. He increases your damage by 20% with his cry. Dean gives a great buff, hard to hit, and is surprisingly tanky for a bird. Feels more like a partner than something you call on to win the fight for you. A lot of you guys enjoy the idea of having a bird companion help you out from the skies. Just something about having a pet falcon helping you fight off a host of enemies. Aesthetic perfection to me. When he once lived, he was a fierce hawk that faithfully rendered lifelong service to the old King of Stormvale, so the fact that we can have him fighting by our side is a nice morale boost. As the creeper that girdles the tree trunk, the law runneth forward and back. The strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a simple woman. I see good boys, I put them first. These 3 wolves are the very first summon you are meant to receive, as you get them alongside the method of summoning in general, the Spirit Calling Bell. And from your responses, I'm not the only person who got so attached to these doggos that they didn't want to use any other summon, at least in my first playthrough. Basically the first summon you have, and it is still fairly viable mid-late game when upgraded. They're great for tanking aggro and have fairly decent damage output and health. Totally not just because I refused to use anything else for my first playthrough. Emotional attachment, I guess. Something about hearing their barks and happy panting just makes me feel less afraid when exploring. The lone wolf ashes are by far not the strongest ashes, but wolves are my favourite animal, and it's a dream of sorts to have 3 of them as pets. Not to mention they are super helpful combat-wise in the early game. They can break poise pretty easily by surrounding and tag teaming an enemy. At first I wondered why they were called lone wolves on account of there being 3 of them, but then I reread the description and it tells us that they were actually chased from their pack. So their previous group rejected them, which makes me just want to love them all the more now. They later encountered a nameless Tarnished who welcomed them as hunting companions. There is some debate whether that nameless Tarnished is us, or the mysterious Tarnished who was Torrent's previous owner, as Rani tells us that the Spirit Calling Bell and Lone Wolf Ashes were given to her by an unknown individual. Here are the Great Shield Soldiers, the counterpart to the Archer Ashes. These boys are also part of the Fallen Hawks, a band of soldiers that once explored the Eternal City. They are a band of bros with an awesome band name, the Fallen Hawks, who came here to explore the city but died somehow. But calling them on the battlefield with them banging on their shields in unison, no matter how huge the boss is, gives me so much spirit. Feels like I am the 6th guy in their squad. Super useful, great shield stagger. Yeah, that's the bonus for being in the squad of brothers. They are a very popular pick for those who utilise casting or attacks with long wind-ups. The boys help draw aggro and put a line of defence between you and your enemy. Great Shield Ashes are my favourite. Saviours when it comes to taking aggro and tanking physical damage. This allows me to power up before doing a heavy weapon attack. The one at the back can also lob Ghost Flame from the rear guard. Ghost Flame causes frost build-up, but it also has a sad origin. The band of soldiers were exploring the underground rivers of Nokron, but something happened and they got lost, or they couldn't make their way back. Either way, they ran low on supplies. The band's last embers were used up in their long search. They began to burn the bones of their fellows, acquiring the cold ghost flame, but sealing their fate as dwellers of the underground for all eternity. Love him or hate him, you will certainly never forget him, the loathsome Dung-Eater. As a summon, the Dung-Eater is an aggressive, tanky boy wielding a great sword that inflicts bleed, and its weapon skill can debuff enemies. Just like Nepheli, the Dung-Eater can also be turned into a puppet using Celavis's potion, and as a puppet, he's able to do our bidding. I like the idea that by using Dung-Eater as a puppet, we are in some way punishing him for the unspeakable things that he's done, cursing him to forever fight and die as a puppet, a tool, only to be recalled back not long after dying in combat, to fight once again. Unable to truly die, he gets to experience a fraction of the torment he has caused and wished to cause in his ending. This terrible fate is not, of course, not unreasoned. It is all for the sake of the memory of my prawn boy, Blaggart. A lot of the responses agreed that this was a fitting punishment for the crimes that we witnessed the Dung-Eater commit, a man who murdered thousands and defiled their corpses with the Seedbed curse. I think the Dung-Eater is a character some players were a bit wary to engage with, help out in his questline, and I think having an interesting way to end his quest without simply killing him was a really cool choice from the devs. There is a point in the Dung Eater's quest where he is vulnerable, tied up, and this is when you have the option to make him drink Service's magic potion. The Dung Eater despaired at how he met his end, how hideous and sinister this puppet is, and yet its utter despair invites one to care for it. That last line always makes me smile, that despite everything he has done, we can't help but obsess over his helpless little puppet self. Next is Clean Rot Knight Finley. Finley is a ranged and melee summon wielding a Clean Rot sword and halo scythe. She utilises rot, bleed, and can buff herself and us to increase defense. Despite her varied kit and incredible appearance, the reason why you guys voted her so highly on this list is because of the lore. Her story is something I don't think I could ever forget. It's insane how FromSoft can get me so emotional in 2 sentences. Finley was one of the few survivors of the Battle of Ionia, who in an unimaginable act of heroism carried the slumbering demigod Melania all the way back to the Haligtree. She managed the feat alone, fending off all manners of foes along the way. Melania used her Scarlet Aeonian move during the battle between her and Radahn, and after using it, she was either incapacitated or just simply exhausted. And in an incredible feat of strength and loyalty, Finley made the journey from Caelid all the way to the Haligtree. Certainly not an easy task to attempt alone, based on its incredible distance away, and especially while under attack from enemies. But also, if that wasn't enough, Finley was also being inadvertently damaged by Melania. The Clean Rot Knight armour tells us that simply being near Melania would lead to the inevitable, if gradual, putrefaction of their flesh. So carrying the Goddess of Rot on her back, this is likely how Finley perished. But not first before delivering Melania to a safe place. Finley is my favourite because she went through hell and back to get her unconscious commander back home, and honestly, that level of devotion is nothing short of awe-inspiring. Loyal Headless Woman. Leyndell is the leader of the Mausoleum Soldiers, those headless soldiers marching alongside the walking mausoleums I mentioned earlier. Leyndell also sacrificed her life, so that in death she could continue to protect a soulless demigod until their revival, earning her the hero's honour of Erdtree Burial. The term Erdtree Burial is mentioned a lot, and it is considered an honour. A proper death means returning to the Erdtree. Have patience until the time comes and the roots call to you. Presumably, after you die, if you are considered loyal and remarkable enough to the Golden Order, then your body is laid to rest in a particular way and in a particular place. From what we can see in certain catacombs, corpses are buried near the roots of minor Erd trees. So Leyndell is buried in the Tombswood catacombs, which is near the minor Erd tree in the Weeping Peninsula. So who was the demigod that Leyndell would sacrifice her own life for? Well, Leyndell's lance causes death blight build-up, and death blight is associated with the Prince of Death, aka Godwyn. Leyndell performs best as both a tank and damage dealer. She's excellent against pairs of bosses or groups of adversaries since she will occasionally teleport, which prevents her from getting overwhelmed like other spirits tend to do. Leyndell has a great backstory, and the teleport and shield combo means she is super survivable. Losing aggro keeps you on your toes. That's right, the moment that she teleports, it can actually cause a boss to disengage from the summon and start charging towards you instead. And now we reach the second night and the other half of the Wings of the Storm, Banished Knight Oleg. And as I said before, Oleg had the same background as Banished Knight Envoy, but their paths diverted. Oleg attracted the notice of the Grace-given Lord, and later, having slain 100 traitors as the Lord's hand, Oleg earned the hero's honour of Erdtree Burial, so he accepted Morgoth's offer and fought for his cause until the day he died. And because he was considered such a hero, he was given Erdtree Burial in the Fringe Folk hero's grave. And like I said earlier, so let's compare the two catacombs. Engvall's catacombs is an average one, like I said. However, Oleg's is grand and decadent. It's clear that Oleg left a lasting impression on his lord, whereas Envoy was satisfied with his humble memorial. Both, however, were incredible and honourable warriors, and Oleg left a lasting impression on you guys as well, due to how highly he ranked. He's massive, has tons of poison health, has great range and movement speed, and his attacks can stagger enemies that are difficult to stagger. Oleg dual wields great swords, which is just staggeringly impressive. He utilises the wind like Envoy to launch himself forward to strike. The Spirit Jellyfish is a beautiful and practical summon. She not only has good, powerful attacks, but she can also poison enemies. She diverts attention very effectively away from you, which helps a lot of players out in the early game. The Spirit Tuning Lady said to show it to the world, and it became my friend, and I brought it to its sister and cried. Roderiga is the one who bestows this lovely Spirit Ash to you, and the jelly has a mini quest attached to it. Prone to tears, the jellyfish girl searches for her distant home. It seems her name is Aurelia. Aurelia or Aurelia Aurita is a classification of moon jellyfish, which ties in nicely with where the distant home she is seeking. If you take the jellyfish to the Stargazer ruins in the mountaintop of the giants and summon her there, you will be blessed with a sweet reunion.
Where did you go? Dear sister, you're finally here. No time to waste. Let's see the stars.
These two sisters unfortunately died before being able to see the stars, according to a nearby grave. But reuniting them in death, you can grant them that wish. She was with me through the whole game on my first playthrough, and her little side quest of reuniting her with her sibling is subtle, but when I discovered it, I really think it deepened my personal connection with this Spirit Ash summon. I really do love when mechanics like this build some kind of connection to the player, big or small. Despite seeing the two jellyfish disappear into the distance, you will still be able to use Aurelia as a summon. Latenna is one of the few Spirit Ashes in Elden Ring who actually begins as an NPC that you can interact with, and she also seems to be the only one who chooses to turn into a spirit. Given that she cannot move once summoned, she requires a slightly more strategic deployment than other Ashes, but when placed properly, her turret-like DPS can be a tremendous help. Latenna is a first-generation Albinauric, and because of that, she is not able to use her legs. This was one of the imperfections of the first generation. So when you summon her, she is completely immobile. The only exception to this is if a direwolf enemy is close by, in which case she will tame and ride one, giving her tremendous agility and unlocking the ability to use the direwolf's ice breath as well. I like that Latenna has a quest of her own. She feels much more like a companion and a friend at the end of her questline than just a spirit. So here is what you've all been waiting for, Mimic Tear. This Ash is arguably the most unique summon purely because it's a blank slate. Mimic Tear will copy your exact appearance, armour and weapons your character currently has equipped. It also has access to any talismans, spells, incantations in your arsenal. As long as you have the stat requirements to use them, your Mimic can and will use them as well. The most flexible and powerful summon by far, so much they had to nerf it, which says something. Even now it's still that good of a summon. And yes, Mimic Tear was actually nerfed in patch 1.03. Its damage was reduced and AI behaviour changed. It remains the only summon to this day to be specifically targeted and called out in patch notes. What a menace. So why do people love this summon so much? Because I love myself, I'm a narcissist, because it's me and I'm the most awesome. Being able to summon a perfect copy of yourself is a lot of fun, but Mimic Tear does allow for you to cover any shortcomings. As long as you have the applicable stats, you can equip any loadout that you want, summon the Mimic, and then change into the armor and weapon that you personally want to use. And it's also more accessible than some of the other summons because it uses HP to summon. So for those who don't want to level their mind stat just to be able to spirit summon. Whereas Vigor is a stat that is always going to be somewhat upgraded. Not to mention the way that you actually acquire this ash is by fighting a mimic tear. The shock and confusion as you walk into the arena for the first time and see that silver blob morph into a reflection of yourself. Now, a lot of you mentioned the cut content surrounding the mimic tear, and when I read what they cut from the game, my mouth dropped open. It's so interesting, I would love to do a video on it. And very narrowly claiming the most voted spirit was Demi-Mummy with a big knife. She's a tall goth mummy, tall woman nice, tall strong woman, protect me. Tish of the Black Knife Assassins. The assassins who, on the night of the plot, imbued her black knife with the rune of death and slew Godwyn the Golden. And she lives up to this reputation. She is an incredibly deadly summon whose moveset complements her lore completely. Not only does she dodge gracefully and effectively like an assassin, but she also uses the power of destined death in her attacks. Her black knife has the Blade of Death skill, which lets her fire projectiles that lower the maximum HP of any enemy caught in the blast. This is an invaluable skill as it automatically will scale depending on what level of enemy you engage with. A tall and beautiful woman with dancer vibes? What's not to love? I really love both her utility and her design. The Black Knife Assassins are so graceful yet lethal, it's almost mesmerising to watch. With one of the most expensive FP costs out of all of the summons, Tish definitely is worth her cost. And that is all 64 spirit summons covered, some in more detail than others. It might be because I've technically covered that in a lore video, which I will be commenting below. If you do want to know more, I will link to the corresponding video. But if you want me to go into more detail about anything, please just leave a comment. We have a really great community who encourage discussion. There is no question that is too stupid or you think has been answered before. I really do encourage everyone to contribute. Thank you so much for waiting for this video. I am going to go sleep for 100 years now. Thank you everyone so much for watching, and thank you to my channel members and patrons. Reese's 5, Jawbite, Kyle Coldwell, Hellborn Hero, Ratoyo Blanc, Exile Turtle, Bloodfallen 223, Jeremy, Monkaru, Kichu, Joe Africano, Nubist, Chase, Just Nick, Kevin H, Taganon Dowell, Tabris, Jonathan Veras, Tarnished Ozzy, Milo Raglan, Frankie Felix, Daunted 232, Dark Souls Weeb, Grizzlify, Lord Horatius, Echo Sandvich, Joachim Westman, Bucky, Liver22, STK True, Meskir, Loa 420HZ, Carcharodon Zastra, Country123, Delanator 90, Vinicius Arajo Lego, Frozen Over, Matthew, Jacob McComas, Oblivion's Muse, Bridget Pettigrew, Goth Reaper, Tim, Bilbo, Issachide, Occultair, Lord Mud, Lone Wolf, Joey Vision, Omni Rainbow, Motocross Cooper, Foam, Lord Glacier, Garrulus Goldmask, Iron Watcher, Reign of Pain, Andrew Haynes, Akura, Justice for Radahn, J-Dub, S Keith 001, Can I Win Please, Chungo Bob, Fallen Mind, Mr. Alexan, Raglan Strom, Vincent E.M. Thorne, Cheskimo, Nox Chameleos, Julie, David Mattison, Chris Ritson, Mug, Law Lover, Marco Roche, Roxy Zeppelin, Levante Truss, Charlotte 96, Mr. H, Shemrock 219, Dan Dingley, Jack Tesla, Edaz, Dylan Schnabel, Bugboy 001, Ushida May Shoin, Arlen Leedy, PhD Cola, Hiragi, Joshua Waite, Drew Latehead, Kevin Colkins, Kalmar, Mark Sharon, Wrath Sponge, Phyrexian Sleeper Agent, Alex, Raz, Emma, Jack Simpson, Gaping Donut, Jacob Thu, Fancy Pants Pikachu, E.T., Jay, Anthony Manzano, Twig, Caleb Sadlowski, Art888, McPlatypus, MedB, Jay, Mohit, Mahanti, Brandon Finley, Psyched Seal, Abyss Walker 26, Jordan, Bob Lee, Nick Nugent, Mark Koswich, Red Martin, Deary Bossy Luxy, and S Magus. Thank you everyone so much.